Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inner Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on IT innovation and how it's making an impact on people's lives. Our next digital business transformation case study examines how hosting provider Opus Interactive adopted a software-defined storage approach to better support its customers. We'll now learn how scaling of customized IT infrastructure for a hosting organization in a multi-tenant environment benefits from flexibility of hardware, licensing, and gaining the confidence that storage supply will always meet dynamic demand. Here to describe how massive storage and data center infrastructure needs can be met in a just-in-time manner, we're joined by Eric Hulbert. He's the CEO at Opus Interactive in Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dana. It's great to meet you.
Good to meet you. Let's look at this as a requirements exercise. What were your major drivers when you decided to reevaluate your storage, and what were some of the major requirements you had?
Yes, so our biggest requirement was obviously high availability and multi-tenancy. That was like number one, because we're a service provider, so we have to meet the needs of a lot of different customers, not just a single enterprise or even an enterprise with multiple business groups. So we were looking for something that met those requirements. Obviously, cost was a concern as well. We wanted it to be affordable, but it needed to be enterprise grade with all the appropriate feature sets. We needed dedupe and encryption and things along those lines, but most importantly would be the sort of scale-out architecture. And we were tired of the sort of monolithic controller-bound SANs where we'd have to buy a specific bigger size, and then we'd start to get close to the to where the boundary would be, and then we'd be like, okay, now we got to do a whole lift and shift upgrade, which is not easy to do with hundreds, now growing to almost 1,000 customers. So we ultimately made the choice to go to one of the first software-defined storage architectures, which was a company called Left Hand Networks, later acquired by Hewlett-Packard, and then some 3PAR equipment, also acquired by Hewlett-Packard, is what's made up our portfolio. But so those were by far the biggest key factors why we made that selection on our storage platform.
And give our listeners and readers a sense of the size of your organization. You're up to, what, 4 or 5 data centers in the U.S. now?
We have 3 primary data centers in the Pacific Northwest, one in Dallas, Texas, and then we also have the ability to do a little bit of space in New York for some of our East Coast customers, and then down in San Jose, California. So 5 data centers in total.
And tell us a little bit about your typical, if there is such a thing, customer, or maybe the range of customers.
Yeah, we got a pretty big range. Our typical customers are going to hit the finance and travel and tourism, sort of aka hospitality industries. We got quite a few in there, as well as healthcare is a growing vertical for us. And then we round it out with manufacturing, a little bit of retail. And one of our actual verticals, if you could call it a vertical, is other MSPs and IT companies, and even some VARs that are sort of moving into the cloud. So we enable them to do their managed services and the boots on the ground for their customers. That really spreads us into the tens of thousands of customers, because we have about 30, maybe 35 now other MSPs that work with us throughout the country using our infrastructure. So we just provide them infrastructure as a service, and so that's been a pretty popular vertical for us, a growing vertical rather.
And then across that ecosystem, you're doing colo, cloud hosting, managed services. What's the mix? What's sort of the largest part of the pie chart in terms of the services you're providing in the market now?
Yeah, so we're about 75% cloud hosting, and cloud hosting being specifically like VMware-based, actual private cloud, multi-tenant private cloud, kind of considered public cloud, but we really call it private cloud. And then we do a lot of hybrid cloud, where we have customers that are doing bursting into Amazon or Azure, so we have the ability to get them either direct connect Amazon connections or Azure Express Route connections into any of our data centers. And then 20 to 25%, depending upon where we're at, well, 20% is going to be co-location, and about 5% backup and DR is what's going to round that up.
Great. So everyone is concerned about digital disruption these days. For you, disruption is probably not being able to meet demand or getting the right fit for purpose, fit in terms of not having to spend too much. You're in a tight business, competitive business. What's sort of the way that you're looking at this disruption in terms of your major needs as a business? What are your threats in terms of what might keep you up at night in terms of making that equation work just in time IT?
Yeah, we've wanted a concurrently maintainable infrastructure, right, which also follows suit with the data centers that we're at. So, we need tier 3 plus facilities that are concurrently maintainable. We wanted the infrastructure to be the same so that we're not kept up at night, because we can take an entire section of our solution offline for maintenance. There could be a failure, but yet we're still redundant. So it's a little bit more expensive, but we're not trying to compete with the commodity, hosting providers out there. We're very customized, so we are looking for customers that need more of that high touch level of service, and so we architect these big solutions for them, and then we host it with 100% uptime. So the infrastructure piece, obviously being scalable with scale out architecture on the storage side, we use only HP blades so that we can just keep stacking in blades as we go. We try to stay a couple blade chassis ahead so that we can take pretty large bursts of that infrastructure as needed. So that's been really the architecture that I would recommend to other service providers looking for a way to make sure they can scale out and not have to do any lift and shift on their SAN, or even stack and rack service just take more time. You got to cable all of them versus you do one blade chassis, and then you can just slot in 16 blades really quickly as you're scaling. So that allows you to scale quite a bit faster.
When it comes to making the choice for software defined, what has that gotten you? I know people are thinking about that in many cases, not service providers, but enterprises. What did service-defined storage get for you, and are you furthering your software-defined architecture into more parts of your infrastructure?
Yeah, so for us, right, we wanted it to be software-defined because we obviously have multiple locations, so we wanted one sort of one pane of glass, right? So we use one view for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise to be able to manage that, and it would be very similar for like an enterprise. Let's say they've got 30 remote offices and they want to put the equipment there, and they need to just, really the business unit needs to provision some servers and storage. They don't want to be going to each individual, appliance or chassis or application. They want one place to provision it all. And so for us, right, obviously, since we're dealing with now near 1,000 customers and thousands of virtual servers and storage nodes and all that, obviously the chunklets of data are distributed across all these. Being able to do that from one single pane of glass from a management standpoint is quite important for us. And so that software-defined aspect, especially distributing the data into chunklets, allows us to grow quicker and put in a lot of automation, right? We use Salt Stack for automation on the back end. We only have 11 system admin and engineers in our team managing that many servers, which shows you that our density is pretty high, and that only works well if we have really good management tools, and having it software-defined means less people walking to and from the data center. Even though our data centers are manned facilities, our infrastructure is basically lights out, right? We do everything from remote terminals in the NOC, so that way we don't have to do all that extra work. So.
And does this software-defined extend across networking as well? Are you hyper-converged, converged? How would you define where you're going or where you'd like to go?
We're not hyper-converged. For our scale, we can't get into the any of the prepackaged hyper-converged products. So for us, it'd be more of a converged infrastructure. We do use, like I said, the C-class blade chassis with the Virtual Connect, which are software-defined networking. We do a lot of VLANs and things like that in the software side. We do still have some outside of that sort of out-of-band networking and network stacks, because obviously we're not just a cloud provider. We also do colo, and we do a lot of hybrid where people are connecting in between them. So then we got to worry about fiber channel and iSCSI connections to the SAN. So that adds a couple other layers that are a few extra management steps. But at our scale, right, it's not like we're adding tens of thousands of servers a day or even like an hour, like I'm sure Amazon is, right? So we can take that one small hit to pull that portion of the networking out, and it works pretty good for us.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the evolution of your business in terms of moving past disruption, adopting these newer architectures? Are there types of services, for example, that you're going to be able to offer soon or in the foreseeable future based on what you're hearing from some of these vendors and some of these developments that are appealing to you that can change your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first ones was the one I was just mentioning earlier, which is about the ability for customers that want to burst in the public cloud to be able to do the Amazon Direct Connects. And historically speaking, in the Pacific Northwest, you have to go up to the Westin building to get to the Equinix cage to be able to get to Amazon US West 2. So even with the telco providers back on it, you're looking at 15 to 25 milliseconds latency, which some of these applications, that's just too much latency, so it's not going to work, right? So now with the the most recent announcement from Amazon, they actually put a physical direct connect node in Oregon. It's about a mile from our data center in a facility from EdgeConneX, which we partnered with. Just did a big release on that. So now we can actually offer the lowest latency for both Amazon and Azure Express Route in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Oregon. So that's really huge for our customers because we have some that do a lot of public cloud bursting on both platforms. So that's one new offering we're doing. Then the next one that I think is definitely from a, the disruptive standpoint, we've even heard it here at the conference, is around containers. So we're launching a new container as a service platform later this year based on ContainerX. And that'll allow us to do containers for both Windows or StarNix platforms, regardless of what the developers are looking for. So we'll be targeting developers and DevOps guys that are looking to do microservices, take their application, even maybe old or new, and architect it into the containers. I think that's going to be a very disruptive new offering. And so obviously we've been working on a platform for a while now because we've got multiple locations. We can do that, so we can do the geographic dispersion for that. And I think it's going to take a little bit of the VMware market share over time. But for us, since we're primarily VMware shop, I don't think it's going to be too much of an impact to us. We're just another vertical we're going to be going after. So those are probably the two most important ones that we see as big disruptive factors for us.
And as an organization that's been deep into hybrid cloud and hybrid computing, is there anything out there in terms of the enterprises that you think they should better understand? Are there any sort of misconceptions about hybrid computing that you detect in the corporate space that you'd like to set them straight on?
I would say that the hybrid that people typically hear about is more like, okay, I got my on-prem equipment. Let's say I'm a credit union, and I've got one of the bank branches that we decided to put 3 or 4 cabinets of our equipment in one of the vaults, but maybe they've added one UPS and one generator, but it's not really to the enterprise level. And then they're bursting to the public cloud for the things that make sense, right, that meet their security requirements. To me, that's not really the best use of hybrid IT. I think hybrid IT is where you're putting what used to be on-prem in an actual enterprise level, tier 3 higher data center, and then you're using either a form of bursting into private dedicated cloud from a provider in one of those data centers, or obviously into the public cloud, which is the most common definition of that hybrid cloud. I think that's what I would typically define as hybrid cloud and hybrid IT.
So what I'm hearing is get out of your own data center, use somebody else's, and then take advantage of the proximity in that data center to other cloud services that you can avail yourself of.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the biggest benefit to them, right, is at their individual location or bank branches, and this is a scenario where we use as a credit union, right, they're going to have maybe 1 or 2 telco providers. They're going to have their 100, maybe 200 megabit per second circuits that they're paying a pretty premium for. And now when they get into one of these data centers, they're going to have the ability to have 10 gig connected or even 40 or 100 gig connected internet pipes with a lot higher headroom for connectivity and a better price point. Then on top of that, they'll have 10 gig connection options into the cloud, all the different cloud providers. Maybe they've got an Oracle stack they want to put on Oracle Cloud someday. Well, if they're on-prem, the hybrid thing's getting a little challenging because now they're not going to get the connectivity they need, or maybe they want to be into a software, or they want to do an Amazon or Azure, or maybe they want an Opus Cloud, right? They need faster connectivity for that, but they've got equipment that still has usable life. So why not move that to an enterprise-grade data center, not worry about air conditioning challenges, electrical problems. It's secure. All these facilities, including ours, have every checkbox for compliance and auditing that happens on an annual basis, so that those things that used to be really headaches that aren't core to their business, right, like don't do those anymore. Focus on what's core to business. Focus on the application and their customers.
So proximity still counts, probably will count for an awfully long time. You get benefits from taking advantage of proximity in these data centers, but you can still have, as you say, what you consider core under your control, under your toolage, and set up your requirements appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, it comes down to, the cloud model is very mature at this point. Right? We've been doing it for over a decade. We started doing cloud before it was even called cloud. Really, it was just virtualization, right? So we launched our platform in late 2005 and have proved it out time and time and again for customers with 100% uptime. When we have one example of a large customer, they're a travel and tourism operator that they are bringing actual visitors from outside the U.S. to the U.S. They do over $1 billion a year in revenue. We host their entire infrastructure. It's a lot of infrastructure, and it's a very mature model. We've been doing it for a long time, and that helps them not worry about what used to be on-prem for them. They moved it all. Portion of it is colo. The rest is all on our private cloud, so that they can just focus on their application, all their transactions, and ultimately, making their customers happy.
Going back to the storage equation, do you have any examples, Eric, of where the storage software-defined environment gave you the opportunity to satisfy customers or price points, either business or technical metrics that demonstrate how this new approach to storage particularly fills out this equation for cloud and hybrid cloud?
Yeah, so in terms of the software-defined storage, the ability to easily provision the different size data stores we need ultimately for the virtual servers that are running on that is absolutely paramount, right? Super quick provisioning. We can move things around. Then obviously when you add in the layers of VMware like storage vMotion, and we can replicate volumes between data centers, obviously having that software defined makes that very easy for us, especially with the built-in redundancy that we have and not being controller bound like we mentioned earlier on in this podcast. Those were pretty key attributes. But then on top of that, obviously as customers are growing, we can very easily add more volumes for them. If they want to add, say they've got a footprint in our Portland facility and they want to add a footprint in our Dallas, Texas facility and do geographic load balancing, it makes it very easy for us to do replication between the two facilities, and slowly adding on those layers as customers need to grow. It makes that easy for them as well.
Well, great. One last question. What comes next in terms of, I guess containers is one area you mentioned, and I'll run with that. What we're seeing with containers has a lot to do with developers and DevOps, but ultimately would think that the envelope gets pushed out into production, especially when you hear about things like composable infrastructure. If you can compose the infrastructure in an earlier part of the process in development, it takes care of itself in production. Do you actually see more of these trends accomplishing that, where production is lights out like you are, and more of the definition of infrastructure and applications productivity and capability is more in that development and DevOps stage?
Yeah, definitely. I think that over time it's going to be very similar to what we saw when customers were moving from dedicated physical equipment moving into the quote unquote cloud, right, which was really virtualization. Now this is sort of the next evolution where we're moving to containers, and really at the end of the day, the developers, the product managers for the application, for whatever they're actually developing, they don't really care what and how it all works. They just want it to work. They want it to be a utility consumption-based model, right? They want the composable infrastructure, and they want to be able to get all their microservices deployed at all these different locations on the edge to be closest to their customers. And containers is going to be a really great way to do that, because they don't have all the overhead of dealing with the operating system and all their stuff. They can just put these little APIs and the different things that they need where they need it. And as we see more and more of that stuff pushed to the edge to get the eyeball traffic, that's going to be a great way to do that. And then obviously with the ability to do even further bursting into the bigger public clouds worldwide, I think you can get to really large scale in a great way.
Well, super. We'll have to leave it there. We've been learning how hosting provider Opus Interactive has adopted a software-defined storage approach to better support its customers. And we've heard how scaling of customized IT infrastructure for a hosting organization in a multi-tenant environment is getting great benefits from flexibility around hardware and the confidence that brings for storage supply, always meeting dynamic demand. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Eric Hulbert. He's CEO at Opus Interactive in Portland. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I'd also like to thank our audience as well for joining us for this Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer podcast. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of HPE-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening, and come back next time.